I want to do a little discussion on the principle of sufficient reason. Actually, let me get a book real quick. Okay. This is a principle which is very important if you're going to try and do any sort of cosmological argument for the existence of God. I mean, that is big. I mean, this is a big issue. I'm going to read something from William Rowe here. Essentially, I'm going to read his idea of the first part of the cosmological argument, and that way we can. That way, I'm going to move towards talking about the principle of sufficient reason. I don't really want to talk a whole lot about the cosmological argument. I just want to talk about why this is important. Okay. Premise 1: every being that exists, or ever did exist, is either a dependent being or a self-existent being. A dependent being is something that you can kind of connect to the word contingent. Contingent is a being that has no aseity. The explanation for its existence lies outside of itself. Thus, you have the word dependent. A self-existent being is a being that has aseity and necessity, and the explanation for itself lies within itself. Premise 2: not every being can be a dependent being. Conclusion: there exists a self-existent being. Premise 2: not every being can be a dependent being. This is pretty much saying that we can't have an infinite regress of beings, of dependent beings. Like, if we have, William Rowe has a pretty good discussion here. So I'm just going to discuss it in passing. When we say this item exists, this causes something else to exist, and then it perishes, and then that item causes another thing to exist, and then it perishes. So we have this infinite regress of causality, to where each being causes another being to exist. This being causes another one to exist. So we have an infinite regress back to infinity of a causal chain of existence, of explanation for existence. So this is like, if you're an infinitist of, there are infinitists who say that we can have meta beliefs, to where if we have a belief, the meta belief that justifies it is here, and then there's a meta belief that justifies that, and there's a meta belief that justifies that, and back to infinity and infinite regress, and that we have other things which solve that. But then there are the infinitists who say that no, we can have a infinite chain like this. There are infinitists who say that we can have an infinite chain of causality like this as well. Rowe, I think, kind of gives a pretty good, saying that no, that doesn't work. But I don't want to go into that. The principle of sufficient reason, essentially, is it comes down to an issue of a guy named Anselm, and then the three cases of how a being can be explained. A being can be explained by another. Thus, we have the dependent one. A being can be explained by itself. Thus, we have the self-existent one, or it can be explained by nothing. We can just have a being here, and then there's no explanation for it. So let's go back to the cosmological argument by Rowe. Every being is either a dependent being or a existent being. That premise abides by the principle of sufficient reason. Premise 2, not every being can be a dependent being. So you can see how the principle of sufficient reason comes in here if you know what it is. Basically, what this means is that for every existent thing, there lies somewhere a explanation for it. Let's go back to. Okay. Let's see here. Okay. The principle of sufficient reason. I think I've done a little bit on this before in previous videos, but what essentially this is saying that for every existent thing there lies somewhere an explanation for it, or for every positive fact there lies somewhere a explanation for it. That's what we're having here. The possibility of there being an explanation for something somewhere. So the question here is, do we only have two cases of by and some? Do we only have, do we only have the explanation for something that lies outside of itself, or by itself? Or is it possible for something to exist, or for a positive fact to be, where there is no explanation for it? I just want to think about that. The principle of sufficient reason essentially says that for anything there is a certain explanation somewhere for it. And that is what a lot of this cosmological argument here relies on. If we can prove truth in this principle of sufficient reason, then we can have a relatively sound and very, very good, a very good, valid and sound argument for the existence of God that is cosmological. So I want to know what you think. What you think about this. Do you think that every positive fact, and when I say positive fact, I mean a fact that says there is a God, there is X, or X exists, and then a negative fact would be X does not exist, God does not exist. Do you think that there is a explanation for anything that exists, or for any positive fact? If you are a theist, I would think that that you would say that there probably is a explanation for it, but I think that it would be best for a theist to say that the principle of sufficient reason is not true, because within this world, if you are a theist and if you believe in the Judeo-Christian theistic God, you are going to say that there is an explanation for everything, but within this world, within this realm, within this dimension, within this concrete world, there is no explanation here. The explanation lies, in heaven. It lies with God, and that God is not a part of this realm. I mean, he's here and everything, but he's not here in the sense that this bottle is here. It's not here in that sense. So what I'm trying to say here is that if you are a theistic, Judeo-Christian theistic, believer, then I would say that that the principle of sufficient reason is not true, because here there is no explanation. But if you are an atheist and you say that for every positive fact that there is a explanation for it, and that's a scientific view. So yeah, I kind of wanted to have a little bit of thought on this. So let me know what your thoughts are on the truth of this principle. Because if it is true, if we can if we can provide a good argument for the truth of this, then we can have a good cosmological argument. The real reason I don't like the cosmological argument is because I don't believe, or I don't really think that the principle of sufficient reason is true. I don't think that there's a whole lot of truth in it. So let me know your thoughts.